Hi everyone, welcome back to Slow Fashion. Today I'm going to be talking about how I turned my favorite ready-to-wear t-shirt into a pattern for all my future boxy tees. I've had this shirt for about 4 or 5 years now, and I love it, but I've gotten so many stains that I can't really wear it out much anymore. I usually only wear it camping. But I love the boxy shape and the fit, and the kind of high neckline and the split hem at the bottom. So today I'm going to show you how I turned this into this. I really struggled with knits when I first started sewing, so I'm going to be going over suggested stitches and ways to construct your knit garment on your home machine, and some things that have helped me along the way. To get set up, you'll need to switch to a jersey needle or stretch needle. These needles have a rounded tip and part the stretch fabric without creating a hole in it. I also suggest doing many tests to get your tension correct before you start sewing your real fabric. The construction of the garment is pretty much the same as any other t-shirt, so if you don't want to make up your own pattern pieces, there are a couple patterns that follow the same basic construction. You can check out the description of this video for some basic pattern ideas, and you can just fast forward to the construction and assembly part. The first thing I'm going to do is start tracing the sleeve outline. I'm going to fold it in half as perfectly as possible, and I'm just going to go around exactly where the seam ends, and then I'm going to add the seam allowance back on at the end. For the curved parts of the sleeve, I'm using my fingertips and a pencil to kind of do some blind marking and then connecting all those dots together with a French curve. Once I have everything drawn out, I'm going to add my extra cuff allowance at the bottom of the sleeve, and then I'm going to add my seam allowance around all of the outside edges, which I'm going to do as a 1/2 inch for the entire shirt. At this point, I also need to make sure that the edges of the sleeves that come together are actually the same length, so when I sew them together, they line up. Now I'm repeating this process for tracing the front and back of the t-shirt by putting it on the halfway point on the tracing paper, so I'm only tracing half of the shirt. I always like to mark and label for my patterns as I would find on a real pattern. So for instance, on this one, on the center line, I'm writing to cut on fold, so I know where there's no seam allowance. And since this shirt has a split hem, I have to account for an extra edge there, so you can see on my pattern piece, I added an extra 1/2 inch of fabric to fold onto itself, and then I added the hem allowance at the bottom, which is 1 inch. And then I'm adding my seam allowance around everything. And then I'm going to repeat this on the back of the shirt. And before I add my seam allowance, I'm just going to do a quick check and make sure that all of my seams match up. So that would be the side seam and the shoulder seam for the big pieces. Finally, I'm making my collar piece. I'm trying to measure the collar when it's straight and not stretched. Now I'm cutting out all my pieces. When I'm doing this, I also like to mark which sides of the shirt is front and back, and same with the sleeves. So I just do the normal 2 little snips in the sleeve cap where it aligns with the back, and 1 snip in the front where it aligns with the front. The first step in sewing is attaching the shoulder seams, the right sides of the fabric together, front and back. I like to use a zigzag on all my knits, but you can use a serger to do all the shirt seams. And if you don't have a serger, you can use a zigzag seam to sew it together and then do another zigzag seam to finish the edge. I've also heard that a lightning bolt stitch works really great if you have one, and so does a twin needle for top stitching. Now I'm attaching the neckband. I'm doing this first by sewing the 2 short edges of the neckband together and then folding it in half so the good side is exposed, and then attaching that to the right side of my neck hole that I have in my t-shirt. So with the right sides together, I'm attaching the center front and center back of the collar, and then I'm stretching it to kind of like a canvas to evenly disperse the shorter collar length into the larger neck hole. I tend to use a lot of pins to prevent folds and bunching, and I like to do my pins perpendicular with the seam so I can stitch right up to the pin and then take it out. Next, I'm attaching the sleeves. I'm going to attach them while it's still open because the t-shirt tends to be a little bit more forgiving than setting in a sleeve. So here I'm kind of following the same principles as the collar. I'm attaching both ends of the sleeves and then working my way around, adding pins as I go. And then once my sleeves are attached, it's time to sew up the sleeve and side seam in one long stitch. Here I'm going to start where my split hem begins and leave that area open. If you're not doing a split hem, you can sew all the way to the bottom. And I'm still using lots of pins here because as you're sewing a knit, it tends to the fabric wants to roll where it was cut. So by using a lot of pins and kind of readjusting as I go, it really helps to not get any folds in your seam. So now I'm going to fold over the extra fabric I allotted for the split hem and pin it on itself, and then I'm going to stitch straight, starting at the bottom and straight up to where it hits where it's going to hit the regular seam, and do a 90-degree turn, and then go forward and back a couple times just to make sure it's a really strong connection, and then I'm going to go back down the other side in a straight seam to the bottom. Last but not least is the hem and sleeve cuff. So I'm doing a double fold to hide the raw edge of the fabric. That's my half-inch seam allowance, and then after that I'm going to fold it again and do another inch for the hem. I'm also using a lot of pins for this, and for my edge I don't have a twin needle, which is ideal, but I'm going to do like a simple zigzag like I've been doing for the rest of the shirt, and I think it looks fine. I thought it would bother me, but it doesn't. While I'm sewing, I always like to double and triple check that I'm not sewing over any extra folds of fabric, because I've done that too many times in my short sewing career and it sucks. And that's it. And now I have a pattern for my favorite t-shirt, and I have a new t-shirt. I hope this video helps. Please like and subscribe.